just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together and we're in this together and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Hey friends, welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast with me, Kelly Tenkely, and my friend and co-host,
Michelle Baldwin.
Michelle, this week I was coaching a teacher and we were just chatting about it, but it reminded me so much of what we did all of the time at Anastasis as a team of staff. And I thought it could be fun to take kind of that lesson seed and just show people how we riffed. And those riffs happened sometimes intentionally on Wednesday mornings when our kids had a late start and we had professional development time, a couple hours together. But more often than not, it happened at lunch in the staff room, in passing in the hallway, while we were walking the kids to the park, on our morning walks. Like there were all these kind of incidental moments where a lot of that happened. And it was so cool the way things would unfold because we all saw something from slightly different lenses. And so this specific school and teacher is experiential. And so they actually do these cool studios where they're actually out in the community. And that's the classroom. The community is their classroom for 6 weeks. And so they do one that's at the zoo. The school's name is La Luz. It's here in Colorado. It's an amazing model. Just starting one that is at the History of Colorado. And so the kids will spend the next 6 weeks actually immersed in everything history of Colorado. They have some additional, they'll be at the Capitol some of the days, and they have some additional places that kind of tie in there. But really a long intentional time where they can be immersed in something. And so I thought maybe we could just talk about what that would have looked like at Anastasis if we were the ones kind of planning that out. Obviously, it was slightly different because we did a lot of experiences, but it wasn't always in one place. It usually was not in just one place, in one location. So for this particular teacher, the outcome that they're looking for is they want their kids to identify a problem in their own community and then come up with a solution to solve that problem. And so I was thinking about if that was kind of our end goal, where would we have started? And for us, it always started with the inquiry question. And so I was thinking that one would probably fall under how we organize ourselves, or maybe sharing the planet, or where we are in place and time.
I mean, lots of different options, right? And especially if those kids are going to History Colorado Museum, and because I used to help coordinate those trips with classroom teachers, or I was one of the classroom teachers, one of the interesting things that you can do is use those learning trips as your inquiry provocation. So you don't necessarily have to share a specific question or a line of questioning with the students off the bat. Sometimes that self-discovery, so going into, for example, an exhibit at History Colorado or any museum for that matter, and having kids take the typical trip with a docent or a guide, and then asking the kids to say, okay, we're here looking at this particular exhibit. What questions would you have for the guide beforehand? But then more importantly, after you went through that particular exhibit, what questions do you have now? What kind of things did you learn that you didn't expect to learn? What did you notice? What do you wonder? Say those at Anastasis, those two questions were like in the forefront of everything else, right?
Yes.
What do you notice? What do you wonder?
What do you notice? Yeah. Is always a good starting place, especially if they, so often when they're in a provocation, which is provoking the learning, right? It's getting them interested. It's kind of the hook.
It's the hook. Yeah.
they don't always know what questions to ask, or that their depth of questions is going to be very surface level because they haven't taken the time to be immersed in it yet, or to be even aware of what's going on. And so starting with, you're going to go through and then we're going to talk about what you noticed and what did it make you wonder, what questions came out of it, is always
that goes back to the questions
starting place.
And types that we talked about last week on last week's episode, the 4 levels of questions, because again, you're mostly going to start with the who, what, where, and when, and then get more into the whys and the hows and what do you think and what if questions after that provocation. Like what kind of an exhibit could we use as an example today to kind of riff on?
Let's talk about either Dust Bowl, or there's a Chinatown exhibit there now. I don't know if that was there when you all went through.
It's been a lot of years since I actually went through it.
It has been for me as well.
I think let's talk just Dust Bowl for a minute, because I think there's so many. I mean, honestly, we could talk about all of the different, and especially the cultural experiences in Colorado, and even going back so far in history to say, oh, did you know that parts of Colorado weren't always considered United States? And what part of the world were they? And how do those changing borders change what a citizen looks like? Well, you could have so many conversations around that.
Absolutely. It could open up all kinds of directions. And this teacher that I was working with was like, yes, the kids were so excited. Something about the Dust Bowl really grabbed their attention and held their interest. So let's do that.
So right away, my thoughts went to the Library of Congress has an American Memory website where you can get to any archived resource. So that's photography, it's sound recordings, it's sometimes newspaper or magazine articles. Sometimes it can be transcripts of politicians or other people who had some kind of influence that in what we would call our American history memory, anything about that. So a lot of the photos from the Dust Bowl that we think of that are so iconic are available to view on that American Memory website. And again, I think the hardest part sometimes about learning as a kid about anything in history is that you can only read about it or see it in most cases, right? If you stop and think about history textbooks, you're not experiencing that. Going to a museum helps.
Yes. And the first person accounts help. I think when we were talking about my experience in history, and the only thing I remembered was reading a letter that somebody, or a diary response that somebody had written after Hiroshima. And how impactful that was to me. But it was somebody actually telling their own story.
Exactly.
It wasn't somebody kind of reducing down the topic by bullet points and bolded words.
Right. And that's what that American Memory website also provides. So you've got sound recordings and even songs that were written during that time. How does
you are so good at including the art and the song and the music of the time to help immerse kids in that?
That's, I think, again, partly because, that's my degree and my expertise, right, of that specific thing. But we start to look at how does the art from the time reflect what was happening and the sentiment of what was happening, not just the facts, in order of time chronologically. It's not just what were the causes and effects. It's what were people feeling. And that's for me also where I look at the photography and you see people's faces and you can see, oh, this woman was 34 years old. I'm picking that out of the air, but she looks so much older. Why? Right? This is something that I could put in front of a kid and say, what do you notice about the person in this photograph? And then read something about that person biographically speaking, and then say, okay, now what do you think? And just looking at that too, to say, okay, this is maybe not something that we've experienced, but there are people who do live in 2025 who are experiencing something similar to the Dust Bowl right now because of the drought that the area of the world is. How can we look at that and make some comparisons and talk about what we notice now compared to back then? What do we think are causes and effects? Again, we're taking the level of questioning, and our students were so good. Again, they had a lot of practice, but so good at getting past the very surface level questions and really asking, well, I wonder what would happen if this was, a situation, or I wonder what I would have done if I lived in this place.
Yeah.
And really thinking through on different levels. They're engaging some empathy, but also it's not just, I'm going to fill out a worksheet and then I'm going to take a test on the events.
Right.
There's more involving there.
And I think that the questions can be hard, even for us as educators, because we're so used to the certainty of having the answer,
right?
That the questions tend to be pretty surface level, or it already has a soundbite answer. And so the kinds of questions that we're talking about have a lot more nuance. And I created the question card sets to help us think through what kinds of questions, and it made us as educators, I think, better questioners, but also the kids became better questioners. But we used the PY, or the International Baccalaureate, has this great framework of questions where they talk about different areas that inquiry can go. So it can talk about responsibility, the understanding that people make choices based on understandings and actions that they take, and as a result make a difference. So what kind of responsibility questions might we ask is going to be different than other questions, right?
Right.
Perspective questions would be amazing in this piece. And you talked about with responsibility, like what would be our responsibility so that we don't create the conditions where things like this, we're contributing to things like this.
Right.
Perspective, I think about even just walking through the exhibits at Colorado History Museum and having kids notice whose story gets represented, what do people in the pictures mostly look like, whose story may not be told in this exhibit or in this curation. Form, that everything has recognizable features. Dust Bowl has very recognizable features, right? That could be questioned. Connection, the idea that we live in an interconnected world. So what other things contributed to that moment? What other things were in play there? Change, the process of changing, all of the change questions that come along. How did the landscape change? How did lifestyles change? Where did people live? How did where people live change? Reflection questions, causation, what caused it, right? Cause and effect.
And we knew enough to say, okay, if we didn't have access, we have access to a lot of people who are farmers or who understand land management or soil management. And we did have access to some of those experts in Denver, but also you can Skype a scientist.
Yes.
Or Zoom or whatever platform you want to use. But there are ways to get in touch with people who can then interact with your students to talk about those things. So it's not just reading about it. It's hearing, and we would take the kids outside and go to places where they were able to see where I live in my neighborhood, it's, there's grass, but a mile or two down south from there's a lot of land that's being used differently, and it's mostly bare ground. How are those things different, and what can we see? Just again, getting them to be able to put things into context, because simply reading about that is just not enough.
Right. And especially the way we usually do that kind of history, that kind of reading is so shallow.
Right.
That it almost takes all the story and the ability to connect with it out. And then the last is function questions. So how does it function?
Right.
And so I think even if you could, narrow down how we think about those different questions, suddenly when you're in these places, when you're interacting with these people, you're helping kids ask better questions that's causing their thinking to change and shift. Their perspective starts to shift. Their understanding how it's interconnected with climate, with place and time, and all of the contributing factors start to come together so that the nature of inquiry we've talked about is so interconnected. It's not just that we're in history now. Right.
Right. Well, and that's exactly where I was just going to go, is this has the potential, as any topic really can. It's not just history. It's not just science. There's a lot of artwork depicting that time. There's a lot of literature. I mean, it's not just Steinbeck, right? That's a book for older kids, but there's a lot of literature about this time period.
I need to pass this along to the teacher, but I just read, I think it's called Walking with Giraffes. It's so good if you've not read it, but the book is based on a true story of these giraffes that came through a hurricane in Florida. They were coming across, I think, for a zoo, but a hurricane happened and they got shipwrecked basically in Florida.
Oh, no.
And they walked these giraffes, they drove these giraffes all the way across the country to the San Diego Zoo. And
Wow.
so it's this story of this happening. It happened during the Dust Bowl. It is one of the characters lived through the Dust Bowl and escaped and ended up then in this hurricane in Florida, but was so taken with these giraffes, and all he wanted to do was end up in California. And so he figures out a way to do that. But really, like, talk about being immersed in a story, and then to go and see the actual newspaper clippings as these giraffes traveled across the United States, and the different things that were interplaying at that time are so fascinating. Even, literature can be such a good through line that's different in its relation to history than just purely reading, the textbook version.
Right. Well, and then I'm even looking too, like there are other countries that have had similar issues from different time periods and some from the same time period. So now we can take that lens of this is a US history thing and now make it a global thing and say, okay, how did the cultures where these events also occurred, how were they affected? How did they problem solve? And just, again, making it more of that, it's not just that we're in our own little bubble of this is only a US problem. What happened in other places that had a similar type of event, and how can we look at that differently? What questions do we have? What do we notice?
What innovations came out of that time period that may not have if we weren't solving for this problem?
Did anybody learn from one event in history that was similar to something closer to our time period? Did they look back into history and say, oh, this happened before and this is how they solved this issue, or didn't solve it, one or the other? And what happened then? So I love that whole, like, the looking back in time to see if there was already a solution. And showing kids that sometimes things that seem really big historical events to us have actually happened numerous times in the past, and that we can go back and look.
Right?
It is. Yeah. And we can totally see, okay, is this something that we can learn from, or do we need to develop a new approach to it because times are different? And it's just, that's again where kids, like, they love to be problem solvers and detectives, and helping them to think through, what could we do? What did we learn? What did we learn didn't work the first time or previous time? And what could we learn that's different from now? And again, there's some math involved in there. There's a lot of writing. There's a lot of reading. There is history. You're tying every content area possible into this. And again, you're engaging kids in multiple modes. So they're not just reading and sitting and writing, but they're doing things. They're creating some experiments maybe. And when they're doing that, they're creating this context, and it's a scaffolding kind of activity that as you're moving up to get to the point where, like, your outcome is, or your end goal for this particular unit, kids have had a lot of different experiences in multiple modes. And now that learning is stickier than had we just read about something and then, written an essay or something like that. Right.
Tested on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Than the bubbles.
Right.
Worksheet. To your point, let's talk about math, because I feel like that's a piece where a lot of teachers don't always feel comfortable with how do I contextualize math given that sort of an inquiry. So if it were you, what kinds of things would you do in math with kids that would tie in that inquiry block and give the math context?
Oh gosh. I mean, depending upon the level of kids, right? So first of all, you could, if it was younger kids, you could talk about, okay, what happened in the Dust Bowl and what was one of the things that was the hardest for families, because that's the easiest thing for kids to relate to, right? And then in this case, a lot of people were very, very hungry because that drought we're kind of experiencing that with the avian flu, right? That we have a shortage of eggs. And so now the eggs are way more expensive. So we can talk to the kids about, in the Dust Bowl, there was scarcity. food scarcity. And that made things more expensive. It made it very hard for some people to find work. It made it very difficult for farmers and ranchers to make a living. So I would, again, depending upon where the kids were in their numeracy and their skill sets, you can bring a lot of those concepts in. They love to play store.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, it's also a great place, like graphing and data collection.
Exactly.
Would fit really well with that sort of a lens.
All of those standards that you look at in math that you want for kids to reach, you can do. It's funny to me that people are like, I don't know how to get math involved in this. And I'm like, you could literally take almost any of those standards. You could take a geometry standard and say, okay, there were this many acres on a farm that were lost productivity wise, right? Mm-hmm. And let's look at what they had the previous year compared to this year. And now maybe a section of their farm was still profitable, but the majority of it wasn't. And I can look at area. I mean, there's so many different ways to really tie that into math. And I feel like sometimes in the podcast, we don't get real specific here, but that is an example of, I could choose a cost and adding and subtracting supplies, right? Or I could look at the geometry of an acreage of a farm and maybe the entire farm was lost, and how we could then say, okay, well, how much were they making per acre the year before that drought came in compared to now? And what's the loss analysis? And that's something that even, kids who are in second, third, fourth grade standards of math could do pretty easily. Mm-hmm. So when I look at it, it's like I can,
and then the depth that you could go with junior high class,
doing exactly
the same inquiry lens would be so much different, right?
And what's interesting again is if you just look at it as, well, it was just a problem for science and history. But again, you can pretty much pull any concept of any content area in if you stop and think. And if you're not sure how to do it, ask somebody else, ask a kid. Maybe you really can't, as the teacher, figure out, how am I going to pull math into this? Great. Kids, I wonder what kind of math problem we could find that this problem is presenting, and put it in their hands to see what they come up with. Because again, that's not just solving a problem. That's where is the math problem here? Because there's always a math problem.
There always is a math problem. And I feel like that's where those different types of questions, those different categories of questioning can be helpful, because you start to say, when we're looking at the form of what was the form that was happening, and then the change, and you're like, change indicates math, right?
Right.
Indicates math words. And so looking at the climate, looking at the change in rainfall and temperatures and all of the things that can help tell that story from a different lens. And our kids got good at, when they were looking at a problem, we could look through the lens of a mathematician, or we could look through the lens of a historian, or we could look through the lens of an artist or a scientist. And so really putting kids, not just we're doing math right now, but putting them in the role of mathematician, of scientist, of historian, really makes a difference in how they're interpreting. I mean, even, you just experienced an exhibit. If you were going to create a color palette based on what you just learned, create your own color palette and then defend why your color palette should be the color palette of this exhibit.
Right.
Would be so fascinating. I mean, think about all of the depth of thinking in order to meet that metaphor. There's so many layers that can happen. And yes, there's one big outcome, but there's probably hundreds of tiny outcomes in the in-between of data that you're collecting, the way that kids are looking at things, the problems that are being solved based on those questions that may have come out of the provocation.
Well, it's funny because I think about people who always make fun of education when they're like, oh yeah, we always had to build a diorama. And I'm like, I know that seems pretty cliche, but the skill set and the thinking levels, the depths of thinking to go into creating a diorama, maybe it doesn't have to be a diorama, but that might be the starting point to say, here's traditionally what some people would build. What else could we do to show a scene? And why would we want to recreate in some kind of an artistic way a scene from that time period? What would we be learning from that? And having kids justify that as they're thinking through and doing the planning. I've had kids build cities like numerous times in my teaching career, and the planning that goes into them building a city of what they want to have in that city and for whatever purpose we were doing it. There's so many different ways that they're thinking. And again, they're engaging their minds in lots of different content areas. And that when we talk about math, I think a lot of times people just think computation.
Yes.
But the planning and looking at scale and thinking about perspective as well as patterns, like that pattern recognition, all of those things are mathematical concepts and skills. So it might not be adding and subtracting or multiplying or dividing today or balancing an equation. It might be something else that they will then apply those skills and concepts of computation to as they're doing something that's a little bit bigger. So again, it doesn't always, when you talk about how do I bring in different content areas into this idea of the Dust Bowl, for example, you have to really widen your scope of what is a specific content area and what kind of things really do fall into the lens. And also, traditionally speaking, what do kids usually miss out on? If they're only ever doing computation, and math is so much bigger and applied math is so much bigger than that, what are they missing out on? And incorporate those things into that lesson.
Yeah, I love that. It made me think about Sally Taylor's site Consensus. And do you remember Consensus? Michelle, we used
I think I do.
For a couple of years at Anastasis, but essentially you could have kids go through an exhibit like History of Colorado, the Dust Bowl exhibit. They come out, they choose one piece of art that's going to inspire what they're going to create when they get back to school, right? So one photograph, one something that they saw, one part of the exhibit that they saw. So maybe they capture that with literally taking a picture of it and bringing it back. Their job then is to interpret that picture. It's basically a giant game of artistic telephone.
Okay.
So their job then is to interpret that picture in a modality that they are interested in expressing it in. So that might be a painting. It might be a poem. It might be a dance. It might be a song. It might be a short story. It could be all kinds of things, right? Anything, diorama. So they interpret the original photograph or whatever piece of the exhibit that they are looking at. And their interpretation then gets passed on to another student who interprets the poem or the dance or whatever. And their job is to then interpret it in their own artistic way. They never get to see the original picture that started the game of telephone. But then to actually have them go back to like History of Colorado to talk to a docent and learn about how is an exhibit like this curated? What kind of questions are you how do you make decisions? What kind of questions are you asking? What doesn't get displayed versus what does get displayed? What happens when you don't have enough voice represented in certain places, right? So they can ask all those questions. They can learn about that curation process. Then to have them come back and look at the whole game of telephone that everybody has had a piece in and to curate their own exhibit of the Dust Bowl, right? And now it's been interpreted in all of these different ways. Could be the cool, like what an experience. And if you wanted to, you could say, we're working on poetry. And so everybody's going to take their original thing and write a poem, and then you're going to pass it and we're all going to do, a short story, or we're all going to do a stop motion film, whatever it is, like that is that tie together piece. So you could do it totally free form where the kids get to choose how they're interpreting, but you could also do it where it's like, no, we're all practicing writing this kind of a poem. And so that you're going to interpret it through this kind of poetry, and then you're going to pass it on and we'll do it, another style of poetry or whatever that looks like. So there's so many things that you can like do a whole class, but are also deeply personalized and individualized for each student.
Right. And the whole act of curation, our friend Nancy White was very big on having kids curate different learning experiences.
Yes.
And again, we go back to that is a skill, and it isn't just for librarians and art galleries and things like that. Curation takes some very heavy thinking to process what belongs in this curation, what doesn't. Again, there's so many different levels of thinking in that.
Well, and having the kids have the discussion about how it's going to be displayed, to navigate that in an interpersonal way where they're having to co-make decisions about how it's going to be displayed and shown, and listening to other people's perspectives and opinions, and then making it work with what you think, right? Or making concessions that my idea isn't the one that the class chose as a way to curate. And how do I be okay with that?
Whose stories being told? Are the stories that I want told in this particular set all being represented? Or is it a singular story? And I want to make sure that that singular story, again, that really helps kids stop to think outside their own little bubble. And is it important to have multiple stories told in this? And who should be telling the story if all of these stories are included? Should it be my voice? Or do I want own voices? So how does that change how I curate what's in this collection?
And the assessment piece we can talk about too in that each part, so let's say we had them all choose, maybe they write a morning pages the next day about the reason that one jumped out to them. Why did you choose that one? Looked, the composition was interesting, or this, this person looks like they had an entire life of stories in their eyes and it was just captivating, whatever that looks like. But to have them do, a short morning pages where they're sharing back, and that's more of just a daily creative writing. And then, maybe it is a poetry unit that kicks it off. And so they interpret that piece through poetry, and what we're looking for out of each individual student is going to be different based on which standards they've already mastered and which they're still working on. So though everybody might be engaged and writing poetry, what we're looking for from one child is different. What we're assessing for one child is different. So a lot of times our differentiation came in the assessment part of things more than what was actually presented to the class and what we were doing together.
Right.
Would you agree with that? I mean, not always. But.
Yes, absolutely. Even to the point where I was thinking back to the supportive and supplemental literature that would go into a class, that I would help kids find literature that was at an appropriate reading level for them. And it wouldn't be for the whole class.
Yeah.
The beauty of having mixed ages and mixed ability classes were that the kids all kind of learned together. But again, I could differentiate by the resources that I helped them, or if they were looking at resources that I could point them in a direction that met their needs, and it might be completely different than somebody else in their class. Right. And how the reflection that goes to creating their projects, their collections at the end, their reflections after creating it, and what was the hardest part for putting this collection together. So even that whole metacognition of these are the things that I know my time management wasn't what I'd like it to be, or I had a harder time with my reading stamina this time because the book was really long that I read. My math skills, where I am in math right now, it was really challenging for me to figure out some of the area and perimeter problems that we were looking at on the farm acreages because I'm not there yet. So again,
I got so lit up about telling the story that I just wanted to keep telling. I mean, we had a lot of kids that would just get so lit up about something that it was hard for them to know when the end point had been reached, right? And a lot of times that came through writing, or it came through different art pieces or projects that they were doing. But I mean, oftentimes it was harder almost to turn off the tap sometimes of okay, we got to find a spot where this stops.
There has to be an endpoint, right?
To the next person, right? Or your parents are coming and we're doing an exhibit. So we've got to at some point kind of cut this off and come to a conclusion, at least for now, right? So maybe there's a part 2 that comes later, or a, version.
And I have to say that in assessment, when we talk about assessment at Anastasis, there are a lot of teachers that we know who are like, this is so difficult. It's so involved, but it's happening all of the time. And that's the part that I think, again, when you equate assessment to an end of unit test, you're missing out on so much of the richness of what the kids have actually learned, and basically just drilling it down into one very basic level. And again, I'm assessing more.
It's such a narrow lens to look through.
Yes.
And what we're wanting to do is the same thing we're doing with learning, which is how do we broaden the perspective and understand more of the story? That's also our approach to assessment in the kids, right? We don't want the narrow like pinpoint of time. We want to tell the larger story of how interconnected these different skills are. There's so much of the time that what might have shown up as a deficit on a test, in other words, they didn't get the answer correct. The story is so much bigger of why that answer wasn't correct than just, I don't know it. And so if we understand more of the story, we can be more nuanced in our approach to help the kids really look at, there was a time management piece. There was we didn't start in the right place. There was a scaffolding issue here. There was a skill that needed to be addressed first. There's so much that happens in the learning process that our traditional thoughts around assessment miss the actual story of what's happening, and it gets reduced so much. And how many times, have I used to say my spiritual gift was taking tests because I could get the right answer whether or not I knew the right answer. Look at different questions, and further down a question would answer another question, so you could kind of narrow down. But how many times do students stumble on a right answer, but not really know why it's right or how they got there or fully have an understanding? And if we're only looking at the moment in time and we're not seeing the wider lens or the wider perspective of that story, we're moving on, and that's not serving the student well,
and
right?
Not there
and so,
yet.
so much of the personalization comes through the assessment practice. So much of the differentiation comes through how we're assessing each student, because we're not expecting them all to look identical. We're not expecting every poem to look identical or every whatever we're looking at. And I think that's a place where we can get turned around, because we think that the differentiation always has to be in the lesson. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's more about the differentiation and what we're expecting from each student.
And what resources they're given, and the time that they're given, and whether they are getting to the point where we thought that they were going to have an endpoint, or they got to take it further. There's so many different ways to differentiate. I also want to make a plug for self-assessment, because, and again, a lot of adults think that kids are going to rate themselves higher, and that's very, very rarely the case that we see when kids have learned to self-assess.
And when you give them better language, more precise language,
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Instead of just A, B, C, D,
right.
or whatever, then they're able to actually, that metacognition is happening, and they're able to talk about their learning in a way that is more truthful.
Right. At Anastasis, we would talk about having, be at a novice level where this has just been introduced. I don't really know anything about it. I don't have any background. And then moving up to apprentice, where it's still pretty introductory, but with my teacher, I can really do a lot. And I think what's interesting, and I kind of alluded to it before when I said that sometimes kids will say, I really struggled with this piece because, and the example I gave before was, I didn't do as well planning the acres and the math problems around that, because I am not really solid yet on my understanding of perimeter and area. So if a kid is able to say something like that,
and by the way,
they do.
We have heard it. I know that there's probably teachers out there screaming at their radios, at their devices, and they're like, no, I don't have kids that can talk like that or who would know how to talk. But I'm telling you, when you approach learning this way, kids get so much, they can talk in very precise ways about their own learning, because that's how we're always talking about learning. Right. And so they're able to identify where they actually are struggling. They're able to advocate for themselves completely differently because they've been immersed in it. And so I know that you may think that, you think about your own class of students and you're like, mine can't do that. And I'm here to tell you, every single student, and I don't care what their IQ is, I don't care how old they are, like, we have had all of the gamut of all of the things, and every student was able to do this.
It's
at a developmentally appropriate level.
Yes. And you're taking the judgment of grading away when you talk about where are you along this spectrum? Are you a very much beginner? Are you a novice? Are you somebody who really has it and you're a scholar in this? You don't need help from a teacher. You can do this consistently with repetition, replicating the same results. If all of those things are true, or you're a change maker, you could teach it to somebody else, right? When you give kids the language, and those are the words that we used in our self-assessment and also how we reported where the kids were.
Yep.
So that it was not just common language among the staff and not just amongst the students, but also amongst the community and the parents. So now you have everybody using that language to the point where they're even saying, oh yeah, I just started soccer yesterday. It's the first time I've ever played. I'm still a novice.
Yep.
And the shame of not knowing how to do something or about something changes to, well, of course I don't know how to do this yet. I just started
I've never done it before.
Right.
Right. And the kids got really good at saying yet. I can't do it yet.
Right.
Right.
And it takes all of the shame. I feel like so much of our traditional learning and grading has been about rewarding kids who already come in knowing something, who need little or no practice to get 100% right away. I was that kid in a lot of ways in school. And for other kids who've never experienced something, that was, again, I loved the fact that I was also the music teacher at Anastasis, because I could put a xylophone in front of the kids and some kids would take to it very quickly and others wouldn't. And they would kind of be uncomfortable at first. And I'd say, okay, if you have ever taken piano lessons, raise your hand. Well, every kid who took to the xylophone very quickly had some experience with piano lessons. And like, tell me how you knew what to play. Well, it's just, these letters are just like, and it's laid out like a piano. And they'll say, oh, it's right after another, just like the piano keys are. So now I could say, okay, well, these people are not novices and the rest of you are. So now knowing that, what's your comfort level with trying something if we all work together to learn it? When we take that shame-based knowledge or proof of knowledge away from how we expect kids to perform for us, regardless of content, regardless of age, it changes how they approach the learning. And they are much more willing to be self-reflective, to be honest about what they know, because they're not trying to cover up being embarrassed about what they don't know or can't do.
And all of the higher levels of thinking. I mean, you talk about rigorous learning. This is truly rigorous learning. This is what people mean when they say, I don't know if it's what they mean. This is what they should mean when they say rigorous learning, right? Because it really, you think about the depth of, again, metacognition, higher order thinking, problem solving, questioning, piecing together, understanding how different things are interconnected, taking different perspectives. All of these happen every single day in an inquiry-based approach. And so it's not like a traditional classroom where you're like, well, we'll just give a harder problem set. To me, there's no rigor in that. There's nothing that rigor in the sense that it's rigid, right?
Right. I like vigorous learning better than rigorous personally.
I love that. Yes. Let's say
because
that.
You know, something with vigor, you can still have a lot of challenge and excitement in it, but it's not that rigid.
I love that.
We're just trying to, when people say rigorous, to me, it sounds like, well, we're just making it hard on purpose because we want kids to work harder. And that's not really, no kid wants to learn when they feel embarrassed, ashamed, that they're being judged by what they can already do and demonstrate. I mean, again, that's not, you're just making it harder to say, oh, we're a challenging school. Mm-hmm. No, you're not. You're making some things out of reach for some kids intentionally, and that they can never meet that. And it's not to say that what we do takes it down to a level that anybody can do it. It is putting appropriate challenges in front of kids for their particular development at the time, and allowing them to keep moving forward. And what we see is that kids, even who would be traditionally behind in some areas like reading or math or whatever that might be, when they are put in a place of the expectation is that you are capable and we're here to help you, and we're not going to put something in front of you that you can't do yet. We're going to help you learn how to do it first. It's a different approach, and that's what kids respond to because we are caring about the kid.
Well, and it's truly this co-learning partnership where they're seeing us partnered, they're seeing us as allies for their learning. They're not seeing us as the one dictating the learning, right? Mm-hmm. And with inquiry, the nature of it is we might have gotten into, let's use the consensus as an example. If we were doing that artistic game of telephone, you might have a student in the class that takes it in a really unexpected way, right? We were thinking very literal, artistic, and they are like, what if I interpret it as a scientist would interpret it and I come up with an experiment to show the class? Well, suddenly that happens. And the rest of the class is activated in a different way where they're like, we didn't know we could go there. We can go there, right? And so now it's opened up in this other direction where you might take them to in-car and somewhere like that where they're actually talking with other scientists and how do we construct experiments? And this is the kind of prompt that I have and how could I think about that like a scientist might or like a climatologist might, and what would that look like? And so the nature of inquiry is that you're allowing for those serendipitous moments to happen. You're allowing for the sparks of recognition or excitement. And there were so many times we could not have predicted the direction it would have gone if we had tried to plan it all from the beginning. So I say that because I want to call out that we would start with a direction, right? The provocation, and then the questions that the kids were asking gave us some like, oh, maybe we take it here. Maybe we do a consensus thing and this game of telephone, and maybe we head in that direction. And then suddenly it starts expanding in ways that if we had pre-planned every step of the way, it never would have looked as incredible. But the kids are part of co-creating that process.
And the kids often will start to think in metaphor, which, I mean, again, you talk about abstract thinking and the power behind a metaphor and how many different kinds of truths you can find in metaphor, right? And I remember thinking, again, even with some of the youngest kids, 5 and 6 years old, sometimes would come up with metaphors. And I'm like, are you just like this little tiny old person inside of a little bitty body? Because wow,
brilliant.
Right. Yeah. But that's when you know, again, that they're beyond that surface level of understanding and they're digging deeper. And so when you look at all of these kind of projects and ideas that we're talking about today, the standard might have been, research the causes of the Dust Bowl, blah, blah, blah. And now we have met not only that standard, but the kids have taken into standards in art and math and science and reading and writing. And then all of the depths of knowledge
at much higher standards than their grade level standard would have been.
Exactly.
Because they're immersed in it, they're able to do more than you would think because it has context.
And now they are looking at maybe their reading level. I'm just going to use grade levels because that's what most people understand, even though that's not what we did. But their grade level might be 3rd grade. But some of the resources that they were into were more in the junior high area. So now I'm looking, okay,
vocabulary.
Exactly. And now, do I still have a student reading at 3rd grade level? Yes, I do. But they have understanding of some concepts that are at 4th and 5th and 6th, and some understanding of levels that are 7th and 8th graders, but then there's still some that are at 3rd grade level. And the way that you built our assessment and reporting tool was in a way that we could report all of that accurately per standard based on what we were doing with the kids, so that, again, parents had a much bigger picture of what the kids understood and were able to do instead of meets 3rd grade requirements or is above, exceeds.
Yes. Now I will call out that sometimes that was hard for parents because they're like, what do I do with this? Because there are still 2nd grade standards they haven't met. And so when are they going to do that? That it created other tensions sometimes. But the whole point is we're capturing a more accurate look at what kids are doing and what they can do and what they've been exposed to than just saying they passed this test and they've moved on. And so they have an A or a 90% in math.
Right.
We were able to say on a skill by skill basis and then point to, and here's where we practice this skill.
Right. Well, and what I love about that too is a simple letter or number grade in a subject doesn't say where that kid has strengths and where that kid has deficits, for lack of a better term, weaknesses, areas for improvement. And again, we've read stories about other schools where they have kids who move in and out of grade levels. Like, and I was one of those kids. I used to go to, one grade for spelling and another grade for reading and then another grade for math. But we don't have to do that because we're able to capture that. And again, our teachers are trained in looking for those things and saying, okay, well, yeah, they meet all of the standards on this level. What about the standards that they're meeting above? So as long as the educators are involved in that process, in understanding that we're not just worried about keeping these kids on grade level, it's where are they moving above and beyond? And then also, are there other areas that maybe they didn't have access to before in another school, or maybe they've been with us the whole time, but they just there's one skill that they're below grade level in.
I think about kids who we would see their data in math, their understanding of data and statistics in math, and maybe that was, really advanced, but their number sense was still weak.
Right.
Both of those can be true.
Right.
And that doesn't show up in a math score that's a 70%. What
right.
is that? We have no understanding that that's what that means. And even in a standards-based or competency-based, we're still missing out a lot of times on the nuance because it's still competency-based within this grade level. And we took the barriers, the floor and the ceiling off of that. So it was just continuum. I think that is why we were able to personalize the way we were.
Exactly what I was just going to say, because it was about, sorry, we're not going to go above that because that's a fourth grade standard and you're just a third grader, right? It wasn't, we weren't going to do that. The sky is the limit for the kids, where they take that and where they're able to demonstrate what they know and are able to do. Because that's that education language I can't get out of my head. But if I had put the standard on the board, that would have limited where the kids went with that.
Absolutely.
By using the questions and inquiry and having the kids develop their own questions and giving them the lenses that this is kind of the direction we're going. Where else can you take it? It's exciting. It's fun, but it's also now that I can really see what these kids are capable of doing.
Well, and it's true to we're creating lifelong learning conditions, right?
Yes.
I was thinking about that practice of putting a standard or an objective on the board. You've just essentially told students where the learning ends. The learning is over after we've, and the nature of inquiry is we want kids to say, I learned this and it opened up all these new possibilities. And then I went here and it opened up. And suddenly I'm seeing how all of the world is connected. And I'm understanding something like the Dust Bowl at a much truer sense. And I'm getting a more honest look at all of the components that create problems and the solutions that people come up with.
And the ability to be able to make connections and see patterns, that is something that we want to make sure that kids are able to do consistently, but also continuously. When you stop making connections to things, that's the whole, if you give a mouse a cookie, right? We kind of laugh about that, but I love that as an example for kids to see lots of things are connected. And the way that I see things are connected can be different than the way that you see things are connected. We can talk about those together and then have some commonalities, but also be okay with our differences. And helping kids to see that is a skill you can gain and practice and gain some more, because it may not be natural. We were just talking about that before. It's not always easy for a teacher who has been taught in a traditional method to teach an inquiry like we do, but we've had a lot of practice. We might be people who naturally make connections.
And we all co-created it.
Yes.
Having this discussion exactly.
Yes.
Right. I mean, we're talking on a podcast, but this is literally how we talked in staff meetings and made sense of what we were doing and made decisions and asked, challenged each other and asked questions and came up with inquiry blocks. It wasn't one teacher. It was you coming in and saying, well, this resource exists, or what if we now took them to a farm and let them talk to a farmer about years that they've experienced drought and what that's been like. I mean, there's so many places that could go, but we really relied on the collective intelligence of all of us. And it started with us having the conversation, but then we each went into the classrooms with the kids, or me more during metanoia and some of those group times. But it allowed us to then do that process with kids and then come back as adults and say, went in this really interesting way, or I've got a student who's struggling in this specific area and I'm coming up short, like who's got an idea? And we could riff on it together.
And how important that was to include the kids in that whole process. Because again, if we had only been the ones riffing and deciding, oh, these are great ideas, and then you take it into the class and you're like, here's what we're going to do, and they don't buy into it, or it doesn't connect to them in some way, you're right back to dictating the learning instead of co-creating it.
They get excited about something and they don't have the ability to continue in a supported way.
Right. And again, I'm just going to posit that learning is personal. So I can go in with what I think is the best idea ever, but if the kids don't connect to it and it's not something that they are seeing as a need at the time, that the learning is now, again, more centralized to me rather than student centered. And when I was able to help kids in the best examples I can think of were the ones when we would start off with either a provocation or some statement, and the kids just started thinking through and talking about it, coming up with questions together, thinking about what kind of skills might we need in order to start learning about this. Again, that's a skill that even just before I've learned anything about this topic, there are some things I might need to know how to do first. Yeah. And if I don't know how to do that, maybe I should practice that. So again, you're never really divorcing the different content areas because the kids can think through. I am still a beginning reader. I might have to find some audiobooks to help me with this. Right. Or I might have to be able to find some current events or some news sources that a partner could help me with because I can't read this by myself yet.
Yeah. Or, if it was something that we were offering a provocation and we found this great article, we wanted the whole class to read it. Sometimes we read it as a whole class and we would, discuss it in real time as we kind of went through together. But there were other times where we'd put it through like a rewordify.org where it would reword it, same content, but reword it for the different reading levels in the class. Everybody could be reading the quote unquote same article, but it was meeting their needs in that moment so that when we came back together for discussion, we could have really rich discussions because everybody had the same touch point.
Right.
But it was the same and also not the same, right? Because it was at their level.
We could use something like Newsella sometimes where we were able to read an article and we could adjust. A lot of times I would have kids read it all in the same, and then I'd have them adjust it to different reading levels and then read again. And okay, what do you understand differently this time? Did the change help you, or did it seem like it was just repeating it? They would think through it a little bit differently.
Or what vocabulary did we lose that changes how we think about it.
Yeah. The one thing that I'm thinking right now as we're talking about this is how the immense privilege that we've had of being in Denver with access to a host of museums, and not even just in Denver proper.
And that we had the transportation to get there and the class size that made that possible.
Well, but you're also, as the director, you also made a decision that we are not going to spend our money, our budget on textbooks.
Curriculum,
we're going to be able to have money for kids to have experiences, and we could leave the building. And again, museums are really great because not all of them, a lot of them are free for schools.
Well, and I'm thinking of places like Farm Box Foods that we took the kids, and they weren't charging us to do that, right? They were, there were so many community partners that we built over the years that were just happy to connect with kids and support us in really amazing ways. And
that's where I would say if you are in a place where you don't have the budget to have kids going on field trips, that's when you or your school district can start soliciting business partners to help bring those experiences to your kids or to pay for experiences for your kids. I do feel for like there are a lot of schools.
Or bring community members into the classroom, right?
You have a lot
Whether
of expertise in that.
Skype or these different things.
Right.
And then two, who in the building can be that kind of a resource? If you're studying the Dust Bowl and you know that the music teacher is looking for something contextual to do with the kids, like, could they immerse kids in music that was coming out during that time
period,
or just after that time? And what was the tone and what all of the things that could come out through a partnership like that within the building even.
Right. I think sometimes rural schools are the ones that kind of get left in the dust, pun intended, because
Sure.
there are just fewer. I'm just thinking of even some that are not like maybe 15, 20 miles from where I live. Mm-hmm. They don't have a lot of businesses. And and if they even wanted to get kids to a museum, it could be an hour or two drive or longer, if that was even a possibility. So that's where we would get really, really creative. And for a while, my role was to find opportunities for our kids, whether that was for them to be going out of the building or to bring somebody to us. And sometimes bringing somebody to us had to be a virtual visit. But sometimes, again, just having one other person that is outside of your school, who's not your regular teacher, the number of people who will say yes is far greater than you think it will be. And you can get experts there are quite a few businesses who have outreach programs where they pay their employees to go to schools and talk about their field of expertise. So, for example, my husband is in cybersecurity, and every business he's ever worked for, they've said, yes, if you need a day to go visit a school, go do it. So those opportunities are out there if you just ask.
We had a spouse who worked in landscape design, and they also have that type of an outreach program where they will go into schools and talk about all kinds of things, but they would send the person who was best to do that. And it's part of the ethos of that company.
Right.
There are so many of those opportunities if we just are brave enough to ask, and if we think more connectedly more connected in our approach. But like you said, there's also so many web-based tools that can give kids first-hand accounts and sound bites and videos. And there's ways to do it even if you are in a more rural part of the country.
I will always say that hands-on experience is best when you can't do that. So again, like we used to take kids to different farms, and some of them were helping to, pick apples, or they were helping to clean up the orchard. That was a really good experience. Not everybody has that opportunity, but you could, I was going to say, I know that there are also a lot of those same types of farms and orchards who have websites and web presences where you can watch video and you can listen to people tell the story of what they're doing. They have interactive parts. You can have a pen pal, or you can be doing like a video chat with somebody who works there. So again, it's not an actual firsthand experience, but it's the next best thing you could probably do. And then you can take that experience and try to simulate that in the classroom, whether that's with actual items or you have kids build it. My kids always loved building things. So yes. I do remember I was
going to say, my thought was, if I was in a rural district and we were doing something around Dust Bowl, it would be like, okay, how do we create a simulation of this?
Yes. Yep.
Where they're actually building, two different farm scenarios, and then we introduce different things, and then we look at the pictures and read the story. Like, there's so many ways to do it if you get creative, and the kids would have loved that type of an approach.
Well, you think like, okay, the kids are learning about space. Well, we can't actually send a class to space, nor would I want to at this point. But they, They watched a lot of videos. They looked at diagrams of the International Space Station. They're looking at all the different planets and how the universe is situated. And then they wanted to build things. So they would make their own space station in Minecraft, for example. Or I had 4 little boys one year learning about Ellis Island and how immigration happened during a specific time in the United States. And then they wanted to build Ellis Island. And I was like, okay, tell me more. And they're like, well, we wanted to show what it would look like if you were coming to Ellis Island and what would happen. So I was like, okay. And they actually built this whole area. They used like those cardboard brick box things and Lego and all of these things. And then there was one area that they had roped off. And so they were pretending that some of them were coming in and some of them were officers there. And I said, what's that area over there? Oh, that's for the people who were sick. They had to go over and wait there first and be tested. I mean, they had like a 5 and 6-year-old understanding, but they knew to include that in what they were building.
Yeah, that's pretty nuanced for a 5 and 6-year-old.
Exactly. So when you have kids doing simulations of things, and again, you have to be very careful with how you do simulations because we're not trying to recreate traumatic experiences for children. But what I can say is with their own understanding of how they build things, when they want to create their own simulation and they're building it and they have an adult with some sensibility and some sensitivity in there, sometimes those simulations that they're creating give them another example of how things might have looked if they can't experience it firsthand.
Yeah. There's so many ways to do it. And there's, you get creative. You think about what it is that you're hoping that kids pull out of it and how their understanding shifts. And then you create structures around it. And if that's not your skill, whose skill is it? Is it hiring a coach? Is it working with others in your building? Is it working with your parent community? How many times did we have parents come and say, oh, I don't know if you know, but I'm a geologist and I come and talk about all these things. And no, we didn't know that you were, that you were traditionally trained as a geologist. So even those parent connections sometimes, have interest, or like my dad built rockets and he came and talked to the kids about building rockets, but not actual rockets. He built model rockets, but even that process of like what got him interested in how he built it and how he thinks about it. So there's probably more people even in a rural area that can weigh in or offer expertise or a different lens and way of thinking than you even have considered.
I just even think about the number of times that my grandma knows this dentist in South America, and he would be happy to talk to you about being a dentist or what it's like where he lives. And I was like, oh, well, okay, great. Let's do that. So again, kind of asking families sometimes ahead of time, what kind of context do you have that might be that you wouldn't necessarily think about would be good resources for the school when we're not asking that they have to do anything, but maybe even if they just had a conversation with the teacher, what kind of things? Yeah. What kind of things could you do that you have never been asked to act as an expert or connect somebody to an expert?
Well, and truthfully, when you're doing inquiry the way that we did inquiry, the kids are having those provocation experiences. We're talking through the questions. We're recording the questions up on a wonder wall or whatever that looked like. And then what ends up happening is the kids go home and they're talking about it. And then the parent, we didn't always have to even ask. The parent would come to us and say, hey, we were talking at dinner last night or bedtime. The questions that they were asking or the video that you all watched. And I don't know if you know this, but I have this person that I know, or my brother does this, or, I mean, it just was pretty incredible how many of the opportunities that we had came out of kids going home and talking about what they were doing at school.
Can we just have a little aside about that? Yeah. Generally, when kids get in the car after school, what'd you learn at school today? Nothing. That is probably the worst time to ask kids because they want to shut their brain down because they've been active all day, right?
Yes, they're out of gas.
I'm done. However, what we have heard from parents over time is that the conversations about what they are learning in school has changed significantly. It's more detailed. They're more excited about it. They want to come back to school the next day because they are engaged in their own learning process. It's not just something, again, being done to them. They're excited about learning. We more often than not have had kids who are sad when they can't come to school. Oh no, I don't want it to be Friday. It's
a 3-day weekend.
I know. No, I want to go to school. And when you have kids who want to be in school that much and they're excited about what they're learning to the point that they're talking about it at home, at dinner, or with extended family, because they are more engaged in that. I feel like a lot of times we hear in education that we aren't able to really engage the learner. And so they try to gamify what's already in place. And the system is the problem. I don't mean the system as in general education for all. I mean in how we've tried to make it this efficient thing and we've really sucked all the life out of it, right? Yeah. So yeah, that model of traditional learning has not been great to keep all kids engaged all the time. Mm-hmm. And coming up with cutesy ways to trick kids to being engaged, kids are way smarter than that. And you're not giving them credit. And it's kind of insulting, right? If you're trying to trick them into learning something that's the same old.
It's not authentic.
No.
It could be fun, but it's not,
right.
It could be more fun than traditional, but it's not authentic. And I think there were plenty of playful moments. I mean, you talked about even the kids building their own space stations mm-hmm. out of Legos and Minecraft and all of that. So it's not that it wasn't playful, but it wasn't teacher gamified to trick them right. into learning, which is
they chose to do that
distinction.
Can I just take a quick second to tell you how detailed that space station was in Minecraft? Yeah. And so I had one little girl who was the expert in Minecraft, and she taught everybody else in the class how to build into this. And so they're all building together. They decided, they would one would build a certain node of the space station so they weren't all on top of each other. They really organized themselves. What was so impressive to me is that they had looked at the diagram of the actual space station, how everything worked. And then as they were showing it and displaying at the exhibit for their families, the little girl who taught everybody said, okay, this is the robotic arm and here's how it works. And she'd even built, I have no idea how she did it. In Minecraft, she showed how the robotic arm doesn't have fingers to grab things. There's a series of wires and how they expand and contract. And when they expand, they can grab onto something and then they'll tighten up around it and then pull something up. And she's explaining it and showing it how she built it in Minecraft. Okay, going back to how is this a big deal? She understood a mechanism that I didn't even know that it was working that way, enough that she could say, when we build things, sometimes if she was using the example of the claw machine at the arcade mm-hmm. and how sometimes the claw doesn't work, most often it doesn't work because it doesn't have the kind of grip strength. And so when NASA was learning how to build and all of the other countries that helped to build onto the space station, they knew that might not be the solution because it wouldn't necessarily have the right kind of grip strength. Here I'm listening to, I think she was 6 at the time, maybe, explaining what she'd learned about that. So there's some historical problem solving in there, and she rebuilt the thing. And again, this little tiny person talking about.
I would also like to point out that this is a student who, on the surface, if you had just walked in and did not know this child, presented in a way that you might think has a lot of learning challenges. And that you may not have right. known to draw that out, or you may have approached her in such a way, if you didn't know her, you may have approached her in such a way that was very limiting to what she could do because of the way that she presented. So much of that story to me started with the relationship that you built, the way that you took time to see her, to give her voice, to not make assumptions, to listen, to give her the opportunities to be a leader in the class, where I'm not sure that would have happened in every classroom.
Probably not.
It was so incredible. But again, it started with the relationship. It started with, again, assessing and personalizing, and then realizing she may have a hard time with speech, but this is a child who has a depth of understanding that is unmatched for a 6-year-old.
There were times when I was like, I am learning so much from her.
Huh?
But
Yep.
That kind of goes back to also how the culture of the classroom contributes to that as well, because there were older kids in that class than her. Mm-hmm. But they also knew that we all have different strengths and different experiences. And so being able to come at that with any group of kids to say, we might all be novices in a lot of areas, and we might have some expertise in areas that just because we're younger doesn't mean that we don't know how to do this. And by her being able to go in and show everybody how to use Minecraft, that was another great example. And my older students were so accepting of listening to somebody younger than them. You don't always see that in a lot of traditional models because we keep leveling up everything. Well, once you're in first grade, you're going to level up to second grade.
We also put artificial constraints that keep the kids in that mindset.
And that just because somebody's in a higher grade or a higher age level than you are, they must have more experiences and know more than you. And again, as a teacher, showing that modeling, I don't know everything. I'm, blah, blah, blah years old, and I don't know everything. So I'm learning alongside you for some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Modeling that also gives kids the tacit permission, whatever, that they don't have to know everything just because they're older. And to learn from somebody younger than you. And again, that culture takes a while, especially if they come into the school at an older age and they're used to how things were before. But if you really are intentional about the culture in your classroom and helping kids to say anybody can learn from anyone else.
And we did that school-wide.
Yes.
I mean, in Metanoia, we all had a consistent topic that we were talking about, and it did not matter what the topic was. Everybody felt equally okay to raise their hand and contribute to the conversation. And so kids were seeing, I would have never noticed that detail that 5-year-old noticed, right?
Right.
They saw it in a different way that now has changed my understanding. But honoring that voice could be true, that everybody could be working together and seeing things, I think was so intentional in how we built days of our school. We built our schedules. We built the structure of the classrooms. Like a lot of that was so intentionally cultivated through getting to know kids, detox, all the things we've talked about, really.
Right.
That culture was so important.
Yeah. And the expectation of respect amongst kids. I remember when I was a very young teacher and I was told that, you have to make sure that the kids respect you and they have to earn your respect.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think back to going, that was the worst advice I think I'd ever gotten.
That was the worst advice.
Right? Because I look at it as, okay, every human being has dignity. I don't give them the dignity. I don't give them voice. They have that. I need to respect that inherently and from the start. That doesn't mean that, they get to throw things at me or call me names or whatever. That's not the same thing. So earning respect, everybody.
When you start from a place of worth.
Yes. Yeah.
And helping kids understand that you see them that way.
Yes.
It changes. You're not having to demand anything because it changes the very nature of how everyone is showing up.
Yeah. I think back to when I was first teaching and I was always like, I do not have favorites. That's been something that I wanted to make sure kids knew from the very beginning. However, when I was teaching junior high and high school, and again, I was in my mid-20s, right? There were some kids who were like, well, so-and-so is definitely your favorite. And I said, what makes you think that? Well, because of the way that you talk with them. And I was like, well, I just know them better because they're in my show choir and they're here before school. And when I go to take them, I just know them better. It isn't that I like them better. And that not only was that like kind of a revelation for that student who had accused me of having a favorite, but it was also a revelation for me that I didn't know all of my kids as well as I wanted to. Mm-hmm. It was hard to do that in the school size that we had.
475 right? Kids every week. Yeah.
Right. So, but it did make me approach things a little bit differently as I got older and had more experience teaching, to realize then that the ones that they see, and this is, I would imagine it's true for most teachers. It's not that you necessarily have a favorite. Some people do, they'll admit it. But when you get to know a kid better, you respond differently. When you know things about them that help you understand them better, then you also act differently with that child. So all of that to say, we need to know our students. Yeah. We need to have class sizes that provide opportunities for that. But even when we don't, we need to have some kind of human connection that it's not based on academics, to have a connection with kids.
The other thing that made me think of is, because of the way that we structured classrooms, we did not have a classroom for every grade level. So we were kindergarten through 8th, but only had 5 classes. The nature of that was that we had years that kids were looping. Yes. And so we've had opportunities to get to know them better as a teacher, and even to see the different dynamics across the schools because the classes would shift slightly each year. And so they wouldn't have the same mix of kids that were there the year before necessarily, but the teacher would remain the same. So it was just really interesting the way that developed over time. And also because of the way that we were coming together for community time throughout the days, the weeks, special events, different things, they didn't lose touch with the teachers who knew them so well.
Right. Even if they weren't
those kids that were there with you in kindergarten were also there with you as they were graduating. And so there were these touch points and through lines that when we were having bigger discussions around things, you could, any of the teachers could come in and you could say, remember when we did that, you guys built that space in Minecraft. I wonder what that might, if we applied that same thinking here. And then suddenly it's all, their school experience as a whole, kindergarten through 8th grade, has this incredible through line of relationship, of we had these experiences together. We can still draw on these experiences. I didn't know that it was going to do that when we set up Anastasis year 1.
Right.
That wouldn't have been something I knew to call out until I saw it as I reflect back, and what that looked like over time, and how important that ended up being.
Even when the kids didn't have like memory of a specific activity that I did. Oh gosh, remember when we did that Lego and you guys were doing like a zip line and you were learning about friction, and they'd be like, no. And then I'd show them a picture of it because, I never ever deleted pictures.
I know.
And they're like, oh yeah. They might not have remembered every detail because again, they were little kids and memory changes as you get older. But it was interesting to see their reaction and what they could make a connection to, even if they didn't remember the lessons that they had learned then. There was still something, and if anything else, it was still, oh yeah, that was really fun, right? Mm-hmm. Like they remember something that they had done that was fun.
Or they would, even the laughter over, look at how little we were,
right?
Those kind of things. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we made pies that year. I remember making pies down in the kitchen. That was really fun. Yeah. Just any of those kind of experiences. So Kelly, we keep going back to every podcast, no matter the topic, we keep going back to the fact that the culture and the relationships that you create are the most important part of helping kids to get to their truest potential in learning.
Yeah. And it's the part that is I find the most overlooked, because we focus so much on brain, in our decision making and the way we approach things. And again, even when I see schools really trying to build culture, it feels like too often it starts in the wrong place with what curriculum can we add that will build it for us, instead of just seeing the kids and making intentional decisions because you see the kids.
Yeah.
So I mean, truly, so much of what we built in inquiry and co-created with them in inquiry, what came out of the culture that we had built, and so much of what we were able to do as a staff, and the trust we had on us as a staff to give each other input and question things and say, well, hold on, maybe not so fast there, because have you considered that might look this way, or it might, have this unintended consequence that you're not intending. So it wasn't even always that we were constructively building something or like offering each other ideas. It was also the critical thinking of a whole group saying, you might not have thought about it this way, but this could come across like this, or
right.
maybe we approach it differently. So we could also be those critical thought partners because we held that space for each other, and we had permission to do that with each other.
Right. And I look at education companies that want to sell you a product, whether it's curriculum, whether it's some kind of supplemental tool. I first want to know, what's the benefit? Is there a benefit here that I can't work with my own staff and students to create on our own? Is it a package deal that really doesn't meet the needs of my kids, because no package can meet the need of every kid? Is there some bias in there that maybe the people who created it don't even understand? And I'm thinking too, I want to see a picture of your company, so I know who's behind all of this and what was your goal in creating this. Too often I see, there's this niche that we know we can fit in and it's going to be a moneymaker for us. That is a huge issue. Or we think we know kids really well and we want to tell you how to do this. And maybe they're right, but maybe that's only right for a certain group of kids. There are also sometimes when people really lack, like they could use a sensitivity reader of, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I'm just thinking of there was an AI model of Anne Frank.
Tell me more. Tell me what raised your flags, because it'll be important for people.
Well,
I think it's important, right? Because these are the conversations that we had as a staff, of somebody would come in and really excited. Like, I found this cool AI and now here's an immersive experience that my kids can have with history, where they're getting a firsthand with Anne Frank, right? They're excited about this. I
would say, except it's not Anne Frank. We should not even presume to know how she would respond. So this was like a chat bot that was created for kids to interact with. I mean, what possibly could go wrong, right? So if you're asking questions, again, who programmed it? What was their motive? What were their intentions? It definitely blew up in a very bad way. There were things that I'm not going to get into details because I don't think this is a place for that, but there were things that the bot said back to students that were not only factually incorrect, but also, maybe a little bit more forgiving of the events that happened than they should have been. I'm trying to be super diplomatic right now.
Sure.
But it's not.
But you truly would have said this in a staff meeting where we're all sitting together and somebody's excited about this. And you would have been like, okay, here are some things to think through of why this might not be a great idea.
Earlier, I alluded to
all the pieces.
Yeah, I alluded to simulation, and simulations can often be very helpful for kids to learn. However, when you look at history where there's been discrimination or
power dynamic,
absolutely, those are the kind of simulations you would never do in a classroom, because kids do not have the abstract thought of an ability to see the right. They might see the right and the wrong, but to put kids in a position where they might be on the end of discrimination or in the end of a power dynamic is not something that you would simulate. I can simulate,
or you're resurfacing generational trauma.
Exactly. So
it's probably not a good.
No. So again, the adults in the room need to help steer kids in a situation where they're building things and they're creating things to try to reenact. However, you also have to be able to have the stories and different perspectives that are not just your own, to know this is a good way to go, or we definitely should not go in this direction. And so to bring it back to that AI model, I don't know how many different people read through that and said, yeah, that's a good idea, because they didn't think through the potential.
On the surface, right? I think back, I can't remember the name of it. Shadoni, I think it was called Shadoni. It was a website, and it was Club Penguin-esque, that you could go in, the kids could go in, but they could interact with historical figures.
Right.
And
I remember that.
Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
It was more where you could ask pre-programmed questions and it would give the pre-programmed answer. So it wasn't so open-ended as what we're talking about here. And I thought it was incredible because it let the kids immerse themselves in a different way. I'm not sure I would still use it the way I used it however many 18 years ago. But when it came out, it was really exciting. Now, when I look at it, I know to ask more nuanced questions because we taught the way that we taught.
Right.
And so it has changed how I think about it. But the idea being, how do we get all educators thinking through more lenses and asking better questions to surface some of these things before we roll them out with kids and then have to reel it back later? And it can be hard to do because, you know, in this country, we're conditioned to get excited about the new shiny thing. The new iPhone came out. We all got to buy the new iPhone, you know? It's like there's so many shiny things that we really are conditioned in everyday life of like, did you see the new episode of, or did you do that, you know? And so there is a impulse to rush to some of these things without digging in and really, as the educator, thinking through what might be some unintended consequences of this type of opportunity or piece of technology or whatever it is.
That's really a great question to ask. And it's, again, if I were looking, maybe even just like bringing in sensitivity readers, for example.
This is why, by the way, what I do love about a Blue Sky, a Threads, a Twitter back in the day, because if you aren't seeing the thing, I guarantee you someone in your network will see the thing and go, hold on, what about?
Yeah.
Did you think about?
That's what's great about having a network. Even if, you know, the tools that you used to access are no longer there for your network. I know that at any point there are several people around the world, not just in the United States, that I could reach out to and say, hey, give me your take on this. Because first of all, we have the kind of relationship where we're not only friends, but also consider ourselves colleagues. There are people that I respect that I would say, hey, I'm seeing this. What are your thoughts? Because I know that I don't have every perspective in my head.
Or even just going out there and doing a quick search to see what other people have said about it can be helpful. So even if you don't have that network, those are the kind of places where people will very freely share all the opinions they have. And so even if you ultimately don't end up agreeing with those opinions, at least surface what others are thinking about and how they're thinking about it, the other perspectives that might be there, because it can help you be your own sensitivity reader.
Absolutely.
You know, it can at least open your eyes to something you might not have considered.
Right. And it's important, I think, for us all to remember, we don't hold every opinion and every perspective, even if we have consistently trained ourselves to look for those things.
Oh, it's impossible.
We're not the owners of those. So again, I really always like to hear from different voices, people from different places and different life time kind of experience. But kind of going back to anytime there's something prepackaged that people want to sell me about, oh, this will make your grading lifestyle better, or this will make it, it easier to teach reading, or this will. And I'm always a little bit.
Your problems.
Yes, I'm always skeptical when they say.
Yes, because why? Because we know the kids.
Yeah,
they don't know our
kids.
They don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody just approached me and asked if they could show me a tool that would help with grading and assessment. And I said, well, we've built that and we don't do that the same way. So I'm sorry that, this product really couldn't possibly meet my needs, nor would you want my input because it would be very different from what you have.
I wouldn't be your audience.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do when they're, and it's not to say that all products are bad. I do make sure that I'm looking at, okay, do these meet the needs that I have, and do they meet the needs that my kids might have, and then I can go from there. And we've definitely used other corporations' tools.
Absolutely.
Throughout our tenure. And there have been some that have met the needs for a long time, or some for just a very short time. So it's not to say that all other products are bad, but just it's that due diligence of, I'm going to do more than just look at this on the surface. I'm going to dig a little deeper. I want to know who created this.
And recognize that they are selling to you. Right?
Exactly.
So
yes.
There's marketing mixed in. There's all these pieces mixed in that need to be considered. And again, as I reflect back on all of the years, we all got so much better at this.
Yeah.
As the adults.
It takes practice.
And it was because we were doing it together regularly. It was because we were asking questions. It was because we were doing it with kids. And when you do it with kids and they get better at asking questions, suddenly you're starting to see the world differently too. So it changes them, but it also changed me. And a lot of the ways that I look at the practices that are in place and the things that we're doing, purely because we were always all engaged in that inquiry process.
Well, I would just think back at how when we first started, the idea of no textbooks, no resource, we had a library of sorts, or we went to the library, but we didn't have curriculum dictating what to teach. For me, because I had been a music teacher that didn't use curriculum or wrote my own, it was, this is just how I do it. For others, I know that was something that they really struggled with at first because sometimes it felt like too much freedom. What I would always tell kids was, I always like to go to primary and secondary resources anyway. What are those and do we have access to them? And the answer is almost always yes. Yeah. Or we can get to someplace that like a library that has access to them. And how, as soon as we kind of got past that hurdle, and I realized how much for some teachers leaning on the curriculum and the textbooks was like, oh, you can teach without those. You don't need them. And here's why is we have good sequence. We have good scope. We have the inquiry questions and the lines of questioning, all of those things there to help us really say, okay, are we teaching what we say we're teaching? Yes. Do we have the standards in place? Yes. How we get there can be vastly different, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's not what we're learning. It's how we are engaging learning. Those are totally different questions.
Right. And we're still meeting the standards that if we had a textbook, the textbooks would say we're meeting these standards. But I feel like we met them in a much better, in a deeper style of learning that made that, like I said it earlier, made the learning sticky. Yeah. And we were able to keep building on that year after year.
Yeah. This is going to be a little bit of a deviation, but only because I think it fits. This book, Deviate, was recommended. It's called The Creative Power of Transforming Your Perception by Bo Lotto, recommended by Christian Long. And it's so brilliant. Like, I cannot get enough. I'm like, I'll just read, a chapter and then I read 3 at a time. But in this book, they talk about this this experiment that was put on by, I remember who it was put on by, Held and Hine in 1963. Basically, they had 2 kittens and they were looking at how perception changes, but they essentially gave the kittens the same visual perception. So they were kept in darkness from birth. And then after a few weeks, they got exposed to light a little at a time, but they were attached to a carousel that just went round and round. The one kitten, we'll call it kitten A, had free reign where they walked around the carousel, and that moved the carousel for kitten B that was in a basket. But essentially, they're seeing visually the same thing as the carousel goes along. Well, then later on, a couple months in or weeks in, they allow the kittens to have free reign outside of the carousel, with the idea being that they've visually had the same experience, but the perception of kitten A that had the free reign and was getting the tactile feedback of walking around and different surfaces and all of these pieces that kitten B did not have, was able to go all around and act like a kitten and have kitten-like experiences, right? Jumping up and doing things, and it had no problem acting like a kitten, like very quickly. Kitten B could not do any of those things but visually had the same experience as kitten A. And so the perception, the additional sense perception that came for kitten A made a huge difference. going back to the immersive nature of inquiry that we started with and the experiential, this to me is such a good reason why that experiential is so important. And going back to the AI piece is what makes me a little bit nervous about the way that tech companies are suggesting AI be used in classrooms, because essentially we're creating an entire society of kids that's getting the basket perception of learning without all of the additional sensory inputs of truly immersive living curriculum of being in it. And so we know that this is how it works, and yet we keep sticking to textbooks that lets us see learning from a basket instead of figuring out how to make it immersive, how to have the experience, how to put kids in these places where these things are happening.
We keep repeating this also, and I know I do. Learning is not a delivery and consuming process. It is an experience process. And the brain cannot learn through one mode only. So, and again, you're saying AI, that's just...
It can't. It can learn through one mode only.
Sure.
It's not going to be useful through one mode only.
I said sure, but I'm going to actually push back and say no, it's not. It's not true learning then.
I would agree with you. The way that we define learning, I agree it's not true learning. They're getting something will come out of it. Is it the fullest?
For some kids, maybe, but not all kids.
This is true.
Because again, if you're just delivering, if I'm just doing lecture, for example, this is such a weird thing. I have audio processing issues when it comes to speech, mostly English. If it's another language, I'm fine. I know this because I don't have any hearing difficulty, but I have to watch TV with captions. Part of that is because streaming has really messed up the audio, but even in a movie theater, I'll miss things a lot. When I go to memorize music, I can memorize every note, all of the notes that you play, but when it comes to the lyrics of a song, I forget them if they're in English. I've learned over time that I have some audio processing issues when it comes to language. If I'm only in a class where the delivery mode is lecture, I am not going to learn the same as somebody else who that's a strength for.
Absolutely.
So we go back to this whole education as a delivery model only. We lose so much of what learning truly is and how, what sticks with kids. The number of adults who will tell me, I know I learned that in school, but I don't remember anything about it, because they didn't really learn it. They got that very surface level introduction of what that concept or skill was. And then they moved on.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think the more that we can, again, the immersive is you're giving kids more senses that they're interacting with and they're experiencing the world with. You're creating the conditions for lifelong learning because they know how to question, because they know how to identify problems, because it's not just getting the right answer, the certainty of the right answer.
Right.
And
the connections. How are these things connected to things that seem like they're separate, but really are not?
And for the kids to be the ones making those connections, not the robot making those connections.
Right.
So I do think that there is a place for AI in the classroom. I don't think it's the way it's currently being sold. I'll say that.
And I would also say that we are nowhere near the iteration of what AI, for the most part, a lot of people are just using AI as a search engine. We already have a search engine. So now you're using it in a capacity that allows it to unethically take other people's work, but also to be wrong because it can't figure it out, right?
And it is the one doing the curating of what's important, rather than you or the kids being the ones to curate and decide what's important.
I'm not
Which
willing,
again is a really important skill to have.
Right. And I'm not going to say that AI will never be a thing that can be useful. I would just say again, currently it's not there. And I personally would not use it with kids in the classroom.
Well, I just think we need to slow down and ask better questions.
Slow your roll.
Go slow so you can go fast, right? I mean, really, we went slow in a lot of ways, but when you look at what our kids were able to do K through 8, we were much more accelerated than most schools. but it was because we were doing the intentional slow
right
to go fast.
That we weren't big on let's
Fast
take a
is wrong.
shortcut. No,
Slow
I know what
to
you
go
mean.
far might
That,
be better.
yeah. I was just going to say, I don't think we did things to intentionally speed up or take a shortcut, nor were we concerned with efficiency, because efficiency does not mean excellent. And often it's the opposite of excellent, because you're doing something just to make it faster and easier rather than doing the hard work that sometimes is slow and methodical, but provides the results that you're looking for.
I like it. I have not told you this yet, but Mark Parmet from Einstein Academy and I are putting on an AI education conversation March 28th in Colorado, and I will share details when I have them. But for anybody who's interested, it will be free. The idea is to have these more nuanced discussions about what it can do and what it can't do, and be thoughtful about how we're making decisions about it. So would love for anybody who is in the Colorado, Denver metro area, or feels like traveling through then to come visit us. And like I said, I'll share details on that and all the places when I have them nailed down.
That's a great opportunity for people to be thoughtful and to make, I think, some better decisions rather than I'm just going to listen to people who seem to be experts tell me that this is the way to go or it's inevitable, just do it. I think we need a lot more nuance than that. So that would be a good thing. I think I'm still out of town when that happens, but maybe not. I'll have to check my calendar.
Well, if you're around, you're obviously invited. And if not, I'll capture it all and then we can share it later on. But should be, I'm having conversations obviously with you, but as I'm with other educators as well, and we're talking about these things and we're creating our own tools to do things. We obviously want to bring to the surface those unintended consequences and be thoughtful about what we're creating and how we're putting things into the world and what we're suggesting before we just accelerate bad practices.
Yeah, we don't need any more of those. We already have plenty of those to deal with. We don't need any
more of that. We've got plenty. So this went a lot of directions, but this truly is exactly how every conversation at Anastasis started and ended and took detours in the middle where, the kids did, if you give a mouse a cookie, but so did we.
Yes. And I feel like that we are better for it. I know for some people who like to get to the nitty gritty, that's hard for them because we do take a lot of little bunny trails, but they're always all connected. And I see like all the little pieces and how they get put together. And for people who want to go straight to the core of the issue, it can be frustrating. But I think this is also what's really good for kids because then they get to hear different perspectives and they get to see different things and how they might all fit together.
Yep. And they heard us have this kind of respectful discourse all the time, even in a metanoia where I might be presenting something, you wouldn't have hesitated to say, I'm going to push back on that just a little bit because I see it this way, or I'm not sure that that's what.
Or I have a question.
Or I have a question. Yeah. And the kids saw us do that respectfully. They learned to do it respectfully because it was being modeled.
Yeah.
And so it didn't feel aggressive to anyone when we were, asking those critical questions. And the idea being we're making our community better by asking them and thinking about these things in different ways. So I always appreciated that about our people and the way that I know we had a lot of good people over the years. So yeah, that's all I have for today. You got anything else?
I don't think so. All good.
Right,
onward.
Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4, avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.